Chapter 14. The roachback's life was one of continual vigilance, always ready to run, doubling and shifting to avoid the encountering that must mean instant death for him. Many a time from some hiding place he watched that great bear, trembling lest the wind should betray him. Several times his very impudence saved him, and more than once he was nearly cornered in a boxed canyon. Once he escaped only by climbing up a long crack in a cliff which Wob's huge frame could not have entered. But still, in mad persistence, he kept on marking the trees further into the range. At last he scented and followed up the sulphur bath. He did not understand it at all. It had no appeal to him, but hereabouts were the tracks of the owner. In a spirit of mischief, the roachback scratched dirt into the spring, and then, seeing the rubbin tree, he stood like sideways on the rocky ledge, and was thus able to put his mark fully 5 feet above that of Wob. Then he nervously jumped down, and was running about, defiling the bath and keeping a sharp lookout when he heard a noise in the woods below. Instantly he was very alert. The sound grew near, and then the wind brought the sure proof, and the roachback in terror turned and fled into the woods. It was Wob. He had been failing in health of late. His old pains were on him again, and as well as his hind leg, had seized up into his right shoulder, where there were still lodged 2 rifle bullets. He was feeling very ill and crippled with pain. He came up the familiar bank at a jerky limp, and there caught the odor of the foe. And then he saw the track in the mud. His eyes saw the track of a small bear, but his eyes were dim now, and his nose, his unerring nose, said, "This is the track of a huge invader." Then he noticed the tree with his sign upon it, and there beyond doubt was the stranger's mark, far above his own. His eyes and nose were agreed upon this, and more. They told him that the foe was close at hand, and might at any moment come. Wob was feeling ill and weak with pain. He was in no mood for a desperate fight. A battle against such odds would be madness now. So, without taking the treatment, he turned and swung along the bench away from the direction taken by the stranger. The first time since his cubhood that he had declined to fight. That was a turning point in Wob's life. If he had followed up that stranger, he would have found the miserable little cavern trembling and cowering in an agony of terror behind a log in a natural trap, a walled-in glade only 50 yards away, and would have surely crushed him. Had he even taken the bath, his strength and courage would have been renewed, and if not, then at least in time he would have met his foe, and his afterlife would have been different. But he had turned. This was the fork in the trail, but he had no means of knowing it. Limping along, skirting the lower spurs of the Shoshones, and soon came upon that horrid smell that he had known for years, but never followed up or understood. It was right in his road, and he traced it to a small barren ravine that was strewed out over with skeletons and dark objects, and Wob, as he passed, smelled a smell of many different animals, and knew by its quality that they were laying dead in this treeless, grassless hollow. For there was a cleft in the rocks at the upper end, which poured a deadly gas, invisible and heavy. It filled the little gulch with a brimming poison bowl, and at the lower end there was a steady overflow. But Wob knew only that the air that poured from it as he passed made him dizzy and sleepy, and repelled him, so that he got quickly away from it and was glad once more to breathe the fresh air. Once Wob decided to retreat, it was all too easy now to do the next time, and the result worked double disaster. For since this big stranger was allowed possession of the sulphur spring, Wob felt that he would rather not go there. Sometimes when he came across a trackless foe, a spurt of his old courage would come back. He would rumble that thunder growl as of old, and go painfully lumbering along the trail to settle the thing right then and there. But he never overtook the mysterious giant, and his rheumatism, growing worse now that he was barred from his cure, soon made him daily less capable of either running or fighting. Sometimes Wob would sense his foe approach, and when he was in a bad place for fighting, and without really running, he would yield to a wish to be on better footing, where he'd have a fair chance. This better footing never led him closer to the enemy, for it was well known that the one awaiting was the one with the advantage. Some days Wob felt so ill that it would have been madness to have staked everything on a fight, and when he felt well or a little better, the stranger always seemed to be kept in far away. Wob soon found that the stranger's track was most often on the Warhouse and the western slope of the Piney, the very best feeding grounds. To avoid these, when he did not feel equal to fighting, was only natural, and as he was always in more or less pain now, it amounted to abandoning the stranger the best part of the range. Weeks went by. Wob had meant to go back to his bath, but he never did. His pains grew worse, and he was now crippled in his right shoulder as well as his hind leg. The long strain of waiting for the fight begot anxiety that grew to apprehension, which, with the sapping of his strength, was breaking down his courage, as it always must when courage is founded upon muscular force. His daily care now was not to meet and fight the invader, but to avoid him until he felt better. Thus, that first little retreat grew into one long retreat. Wob had to go further and further down the Piney to avoid an encounter. He was daily worse fed, and on the weeks as they went by, was daily less able to crush a foe. He was living in hiding at last on the lower Piney, the very place where once his mother had brought him with his little brothers. The life he had led now was much like the one he had led after that dark day, perhaps for the same reason. If he had a family of his own, all might have been different. As he limped along one morning, seeking among the barren aspen groves for a few roots, or the wormy partridge berries that were too poor to interest the squirrel or the grouse, he heard a stone rattle down the western slope into the woods, and a little later, on the wind was borne the dreaded taint. He waded through the ice-cold Piney. Once he would have leapt it, and the cold water sent through and up each great hairy limb keen pains that seemed to reach for his very life. He was retreating again. Which way? There seemed but no way now but one, towards the new ranch house. But there were signs of stir about it long before he was near enough to see. His nose, his trustiest friend, said, "Turn, turn and seek the hills." And turn he did, even at the risk of meeting there the dreaded foe. He limped painfully along the north bank of the Piney. Keeping in the hollows among the trees, he tried to climb a cliff that of old he would have bound up full speed. When halfway up, his footing gave way, and down he went, rolling to the bottom. A long way round was now the only road, for onward he must go, on and on. But to where? There seemed no choice now but to abandon the whole range to that terrible stranger. And feeling, as far as a bear could feel, that he is fallen, defeated, dethroned at last, that he is driven from his ancient range by a bear too strong for him to face, he turned up the West Fork, and the lot was drawn. The speed and strength were gone from his once mighty limbs. He took 3 times as long as he once would have mount each one of the well-known ridges, and as he went, he glanced backwards from time to time to know if he was pursued. Away up the head of the little branch were the Shoshones, bleak and forbidding. No enemies were there, and the park was beyond it. On and on he must go. But as he climbed with shaking limbs and short, uncertain steps, the west wind brought the odor of Death Gulch. That fearful little valley where everything was dead, where the very air was deadly. It used to disgust him and drive him away, but now Wob felt that it was a message for him, like he was drawn by it. It was in his line of flight, and he hobbled slowly towards the place. He went nearer and nearer until he stood upon the entering ledge. A vulture that had descended to feed upon one of the victims was slowly going to sleep on an untouched carcass. Wob swung his great grizzled muzzle and his long white beard in the wind. The odor that he once had had and hated was now attractive. There was a bit of strange quality in the air. His body craved it, for it seemed to numb his pain and it promised sleep, as it did that day when first he saw this place. Far below, to the right and to the left, and on as far as the eye could reach, was the great kingdom that once had been his, where he had lived for years in the glory of his strength, where none had dared to meet him face to face. The whole earth could show no view more beautiful. But Wob had no thought of its beauty. He only knew it was a good land to live in, that it had been his, but that now it was gone, for his strength was gone, and he was flying to seek a place where he might rest and be at peace. Away over the Shoshones, indeed, was the road to the park, but it was far, far away, with a doubtful end to the long, doubtful journey. But why so far? Here in this little gulch was all he sought. Here was peace and painless sleep. He knew this, for his nose, his never wrong nose, said, "Here, here now." He paused a moment at the gate, and as he stood, the wind-borne fumes began their subtle work. 5 were the faithful wardens of his life, and the best and trusted of them all flung open wide the door he long had kept. A moment still Wob stood in doubt. His lifelong guide was silent now, had given up his post, but another sense he felt within. The angel of the wild thing was standing there, beckoning in the little vale. Wob did not understand. He had no eyes to see the tear in the angel's eyes, nor the pitying smile that was surely on his lips. He could not even see the angel, but he felt him, beckoning him onward. A rush of his ancient courage surged in the grizzly's rugged breast. He turned aside into that little gulch. The deadly vapors entered, filled his huge chest, and tingled in his vast, heroic limbs as he calmly lay down upon the rocky, herbless floor and gently went to sleep, as he did that day in his mother's arms by the Grable long, long ago. End of chapter 14. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've reached the end of the story about Wob the Grizzly. Always enjoyed this little story. It's a simple story, fairly simple premise, but one of those stories that just kind of good to pass the time. One of those books that's nice to have in the hunt shack when you're just putting in time and looking for something to keep your mind at work. Thank you for everyone who's been faithfully listening and leaving comments. It's certainly been appreciated. Thank you to everyone who was generous enough to offer up a super thanks, a small donation. They're certainly appreciated. Anyways, folks, we'll be carrying on with more books in the future. We'll look for one that sparks the interest, and we'll go from there. We'll see you on the next one, guys. Bye for now.